and you were just in Japan, right, for to participate in the tradition of holding the position of temporary abbot. What was
Right.
that like?
That was quite a unique experience. I think it's unique for everybody who does it because it's not a typical type of thing that uh, regular priests do. You only do it one time. And so uh, I think everybody who participates in Zuise, this practice of being a temporary, it's like one night abbotship of, the head temples. In Soto Zen Buddhism, we have two head temples in Japan, Eiheiji Temple in Fukui Prefecture and Soji Temple in Tsurumi Ward of Yokohama City near Tokyo. And so, uh, yeah, sometimes one does it by oneself, or sometimes you're with a group of two or three other people, several other people, and it's new for it's a everyone is a little bit nervous because we nobody has the experience of officiating a service at the monasteries. Everyone may have trained there for some time or whatever, but and there's all these little tiny mm, details of ceremony or ritual that you know when you offer incense at Eiheiji, you turn one way, and you offer incense at Soji, you have to turn the other way. And if you make a mistake on that, it's very embarrassing. Or, Soji morning service often includes, sutra. We do these type of how do you say it in English? Maybe like you open the sutra book and let fan the pages down, and you don't want to kind of mess up with that. And so, so if you're not used to it, and it can be at Ehiji, they don't do it in the morning. So, and how you put your robes on, your outer robe, the okesa on is different in Sojiji and Ehiji and stuff like that. So even if you're very well trained individual at one of those head monasteries. Most people don't go to both. And so you still have to be a little bit careful and cautious about making sure you do the ceremony right so that you're not embarrassing yourself or your teachers or your temple. So, so that was my recent experience. I had a chance to go in December a few weeks ago. It's a kind of cold period for especially Eiheiji Temple and in Fukui Prefecture, and so uh, we had an opportunity to uh, participate not just in morning service, but going up to usually you can't go to the founders hall to do certain bows and some things there. So it was kind of a very unique experience, and uh, typically, uh, especially at least in Japanese Soto Zen Buddhism, uh, the practice is after you receive Dharma transmission from your teacher, within 1 year, you should go and do this. You can always reapply for it, but the headquarters has a preference that people from 1 year from the time of their Dharma transmission do the Zuise practice. And so uh, by chance, I had received Dharma transmission last April, and so I had to in my from my temple in Nagano Prefecture. So my teacher wanted me to make sure I kept within the schedule. So even though it's cold, we he accompanied me to both temples. So that was also kind of wonderful to be able to do that. He's now the retired abbot of temple in Nagano Prefecture, Kotakuji Temple, and so in a way, it was good he's retired because he had the time to kind of go with me.
Wow, what an amazing experience too, the where I didn't realize that also part of this was Dharma transmission. So congratulations. As of this past April 2024, you received Dharma transmission.
Yes, that's right.
Wow. That's amazing. Well, congratulations. It's a very special thing. And what an amazing thing too, where you get this honor of being able to hold that temporary position. And then you get to go to places on the grounds of Eiheiji or Sojiji, like the Founders Hall, which is otherwise off limits, and you get to kind of interact or be there and participate and practice that bowing and things like that that are unique to that place. So that must have been a very profound experience. And then too, to have your teacher there along the way, who was fortunately had time to be able to participate with you. And then what was that experience like? I mean, so you were ordained, I believe in 1993 at Kotokuji,
Yes.
and uh, and here you are now going to the headquarter temples and holding this position as abbot. What was that experience like, having been ordained before in Japan and now occupying this position in a very esteemed and important place within your tradition?
Well, I mean, I'm glad I was able to. My teacher thought it was a time for me to do something like that, but uh, it's a something where uh, you feel a sense of responsibility, and I've always been the type of priest that's like not very good priest, in terms of my own meditation training and uh, making mistakes with the ceremony or and so forth. But one of the things I've always thought is that those of us who choose to take that kind of role, some people do it because they're just naturally good at it, and it's like, and then there's others of us who are like not so good at it, but because we have to do it, then we have to rise to the occasion to, you know, now I have to teach and direct the meditation, or now I have to give a Dharma talk even if I'm shy, or now I have to uh, conduct this ceremony even if I'm clumsy. So we become a priest because it gives us some structure and motivation and push a little bit to step up into a role, and so usually then we can do it. But so that's always been kind of my type of experience with being a priest. So it's true. I became ordained many years ago, but along the way, you discover who you are and you figure out what you're good at and what you're not so good at, and these type of things along the way of priesthood. Yes, it seems like, oh, it's a very honorable and distinguished thing to do, but it's just one of the things you have to do along the way. And when you're forced to do something like that, then you just have to figure out a way to do it and get through it. So that's kind of more my experience more than anything else. Yeah.
And I appreciate that you going into that where sometimes like mentally, especially maybe in an American context, when you achieve a position, there is this sense of accomplishment. There's maybe this sense of sturdiness and security in the position itself. Whereas from what I heard from what you were saying, where you ordained, but that could be a benchmark, so to speak, to then lead to more growth, where you actually learn more about yourself and you then undertake more responsibilities which stretch you and pull you and put you in positions where are outside of your comfort zone. But here you are, maybe you're a clumsy person, but now you have to do something very neat and tidy and different and very specific and in front of a lot of people. Or you have to give a speech when that might not be your strong suit. But that ordination has more or less allowed you to meet those challenges, or also create the environments for you to be challenged and grow from that. So I can yeah, I can certainly see how it's not the end. The ordination is not the end. It doesn't necessarily mean it's over. And then I know that also too, with you being having been ordained in Soto Zen, you also roughly around the same time you received your Master's of Divinity at Harvard, and you, I think, just after that, served as a chaplain within maybe the Harvard Divinity School. What was your experience like, having been ordained in Japan and assuming some of the responsibilities there, and then almost maybe not simultaneously, but also coming to Cambridge and fulfilling a role where you're interacting with students that might come to you that are not necessarily students of yours or necessarily even your type of tradition. What was it your experience like engaging with people as a chaplain as well?
Well, in Japan, they don't usually have this kind of role of a college or university chaplain, and it's not that common, but not unheard of to have chaplains in prisons or hospitals or the military or things like that, where you have to kind of serve people that are not, your own personal students or something like that, but a broader public. So obviously, I had zero training to serve. Again, it's like you have these opportunities, you take it, and then you kind of learn something. And so when I became the Buddhist chaplain at Harvard it was at that time, today I think it's called something else, but at that time it was called the United Ministry, and it was based at the Memorial Church in Harvard Yard, and all different kinds of denominations of Christians and Jews and Muslims and Buddha, and I was the only Buddhist involved, but uh, uh, you would be on call, as it were, I remember somebody had a family member pass away, they wanted some counseling, or we had different kinds of gatherings of different lineages and of Buddhist people for both community building, but also for like Vesa, like Buddhist birthday ceremonies, or uh, so it was that kind of thing, not I don't know what's typical, but I would imagine typical kind of work as a Buddhist chaplain at a college as opposed to some other setting um, uh, was the what I had to do, and so that was unusual because again in Japanese type of traditional type of training to be a priest. That's not in the repertoire of what you normally do. But I think one of the key features that I learned then that has always continues to interest me is when we had to, although I was a Buddhist chaplain, we had a thing called the Harvard Buddhist Community that we founded just around that time, and it still exists as an organization at Harvard Divinity School, and they have some amazing annual conferences that they are holding in these current times. But when we were first starting that organization, there were people far more senior than me, Lombard Jordan and Bhikkhu Metanando and other people in Harvard Divinity School, as well as in the Graduate School of Arts and Science. Different people all came together and we formed a community for the first time. And it just was very nice to have a sense of Buddhist community that spanned lineage, geography, different kinds of backgrounds, and also just then surprising to understand that this is the face of American Buddhism that in a kind of microcosm, that, that especially where I live today in Los Angeles, in a way, it's the world's most diverse religious city, but it's also the most Buddhistically diverse city too. We have big Cambodian community here. We have Tibetans and I mentioned, Japanese American temples that I'm connected with that's over 100 years old, all the way to more recent Chinese, San Gabriel Valley area type of Taiwanese Buddhist community. So it's like a huge thing that, again, not so much in Japan, which is where I was born and raised. We don't have that kind of diversity of Buddhist lineages all in one city like Tokyo or Kyoto or whatever. And quite frankly, you couldn't find that kind of diversity in Beijing or Bangkok or anywhere else in Asia as well. It's something very specific to how Buddhism has emerged and developed in the United States. And so that was my first experience of working together with people from rather different lineages of Buddhism. And people have different, I remember Venerable Nittyananda would always invite us to go to the local Thai restaurant in Harvard Square in Cambridge, and everyone would give him free food, and there'd be so much food, and we could all have food, but it had to be up till noon, and all these things that relate to Theravada rules for monks that he had to observe, we had to learn that, oh, that's a rule I'm not used to in my lineage, and things like that. So you can learn so many things by being in community with different kinds of people. And there's some, uh, great potentialities, possibilities of American Buddhism, precisely because of that great pluralism of lineages here.
And then the being in that space, because like you had grown up, maybe splitting time between England and Tokyo, in Japan, and then you come into where things are more or less, maybe not singular, but like the Buddhism that you were interacting with was more or less, a more core element, and then you go into Cambridge, and then you go to Los Angeles, and you're interacting with a lot of different traditions, or a lot of the traditions are present and flourishing in various ways. And as you started engaging with people in an interfaith dimension, within Harvard, did did you find yourself absorbing some different Buddhisms into your life and incorporating some things that are not necessarily strictly Soto Zen, but you found meaningful and have continued to practice them? Or did it allow at least for some experimentation when you were there as chaplain and as a student? Did some things kind of float in and out as you were engaging with it?
Yes, even when I was one step before that in college, I came to the United States when I was 17 years old. I never visited US before, but I went to Portland, Oregon, and started to go to college in a small liberal arts school there called Reed College. And that's when I first uh, found out there are Buddhisms other than Japanese Buddhism, and lineages that believe in different things or practice in different ways and have formed communities variously as well. And one of the even from that period, I remember going on a retreat with Thich Nhat Hanh. At that time, he was not maybe quite as famous or whatever, and so you could just go on a retreat with him. And I remember it was maybe 50 people. Anyway, I had a chance to. Uh, it was like meditation, and he spent that week long retreat lecturing on the Avatamsaka Sutra or something like that. And so I always found like even maybe continuing to this day, he represent a little bit softer version of Zen Buddhist practice, because I think Japanese way we tend to be a little bit more, uh, how should I say, rigid and uh, form oriented. Like our practice is and training is kind of like you do the form and then your spirit and freedom, comes a little like thereafter. And sometimes, in other types of Buddhism, they start with the kind of feeling and spirit of things, and then the form develops over time. And so it's just different cultural ways of doing things. But I often found like, oh yeah, we're all Zen, he's also a Zen Buddhist person, but it's the style of how you approach is a little bit gentler and softer, compared to at least my experience, of Japanese style of how we train. And so, yeah, that was something I took it to heart that, oh, not just for my own training, but as I try to be a priest and become helpful for other people, I have to realize like some people, they need to do the softer thing first and gradually come into the form and then vice versa. So there's more than one way to approach things, and that's one of the important lessons I learned from being exposed, I think, to a lineage that wasn't, my own.
How special that you got to be, in more or less like close-ish contact with someone like Thich Nhat Hanh, and also to be open too. I mean, like I feel like to be 17 years of living with Buddhism meaning one thing, and or maybe more or less, and it being something that, and with a not so much exposure to other things, and then to go to college which and you'd never, I don't think you'd ever visited the United States before, and you're kind of in full adventure mode, and you're willing to kind of take in a lot. I mean, there's just, being in Oregon or Portland, specifically is a new experience, and then here you are allowing another type of Buddhism or another approach to a similar tradition that you have, and then allowing that to incorporate into the way that you now approach things is so special. And to be and to be in close proximity to someone that later became, and I'm sure at the time was extremely important, to Buddhism worldwide, especially Zen Buddhism worldwide, must have been an incredible experience. And then too, I mean, I wonder how much of this influenced your approach to things later on, because I know that in 2019, and I'm sure it may be in other elements of your life too. We can maybe get into some of that, but you have like an activism element to some of your Buddhist practice and your position as a Soto Zen priest. And I know that you've done some demonstrations, or I don't know how you categorize it, or how you define it for yourself, but you have gathered with other Buddhist leaders and maybe some other leaders of other communities, and you have um, done some offerings of maybe protest, maybe of some of acknowledgement of suffering, especially with migrant children. And I was curious, have you always been someone that would put their body on the line more or less, or like put their body out there and themselves out there? Because I know that sometimes you'd be met with military police, or you'd be met with other things, and like has being an active and vocal and present supporter for certain causes always been a part of your of meaningful work as a Soto Zen priest for you, or is that something that has, as the occasions call, you've been called to kind of meet those?
Probably more the latter. It's no different than, oh, now I have to lead the Zazen practice or something. Uh, I may not even want to, but then I do it, and I'm like, oh, that was good, I did it. Something like that. Same thing with these type of involvement in some of these protests or other things like that. I think it's more like uh, at that time what you're referring to is, I think, my involvement with a group called Tsudu for Solidarity, group of Japanese Americans who are concerned about racial justice type of issues, and they very particularly about the connection of uh, the community's own World War II era experience of being forcibly removed from their homes, displaced, and put into uh, various kinds of incarceration camps unjustly, and families being separated during that period. And they were seeing that many of the camps used back in World War II were being repurposed for this new situation to a different community where families are being separated as part of a policy to try to disincentivize migration to the southern border and things like that. And so 2019, I wrote a book that, I published a book. It was like 17 years of preparation, research, and writing. So, but it finally came out in 2019, a book about Buddhism in those World War II Japanese American camps. And somebody, one of the co-founders of that movement, the Tsudu for Solidarity movement, had made their practice was to fold Japanese, origami or kind of paper uh, cranes out of pieces of paper, and place them in strings on fence lines at the ICE and Border Patrol detention facilities, where this family separation policy was going on, just to kind of have a sense of like we are in solidarity, or we are making these tsuru or cranes that symbolize our connection to this type of history of exclusion. Um, and so one of the co-founders used made color photocopies, I guess, of my book, and for the very first tsuru protest at the southern, it's called the Family Detention Center in Texas, had made a bunch of these cranes out of the cover of my book. And so then I felt like I have to, I can't not be involved. And so I started to go to some other one, the next one and the next one, things like that. So it's not necessarily like I'm uh, keen on trying to be an activist or nothing like that, but more like uh, we, our job as Buddhist people in general, but especially Buddhist priests, is to alleviate suffering. Yeah. So our life and everything we do, we're trying to somehow bring down the amount of suffering in our world. And uh, how should we say? That's something we can all lineages of Buddhism, we can agree that that's our primary work as Buddhist people. And so when some political issue or something aligns with the general our mission or what we're supposed to be doing, and there's a karmic connection. In Japanese, we use the word goen, some kind of mysterious karmic connection to a place, a time, a situation. That's the one that we can do because in our world, we have, everything from global climate change to economic injustice to racial problems to, there's so many problems, and they're all interlinked and interconnected. And it's very hard and can seem almost overwhelming to have to deal with suffering and alleviation of it in so many different forms. Uh, and all of it all at once because it's all interlinked, right? And we're interlinked not just to all these issues at once and different communities at once, but we're interlinked through time to past suffering that was done. That's, how should you say, if unresolved, continues on in different shapes and forms. And so we inherit all of that. And so it can seem overwhelming. And so I think it's important not to be overwhelmed, but to pick the part of that big world of suffering that you can do something that you have some karmic link to. And I happen to, be connected to Japanese just because my affiliation at the temple, but also my professor at Harvard as a graduate student. His father was the Buddhist priest at one of these camps in World War II, and it always felt like that work was a kind of thank you and gratitude to my teacher and his family and what they also went through for us to exist today. And so that happened to be my karmic go in or link to that type of work, and so it seemed important. So it's not like I have a set agenda of like these are my politics, and I need to become an activist on this, or it's nothing like that. It's just if it happens to be that that's the karmic situation that I can feel like I can do something worthy, then that's the one that I might get involved with.
Yeah, and I'm sure that, someone doing photocopies and making cranes out of it's American Suture, right? That's
Yeah,
the
yeah.
book. I mean, so someone kind of directly referencing your work, it's like, all right, well then I guess I kind of my name's kind of on this, so I should maybe show up in a certain way. I can sense I can understand that draw, but also too, I mean, I really do admire you still showing up and still doing it and recognizing the connection that you have, that kind of karmic connection to place, or if not, just a community, and being directly involved. Because also too, I mean, that book, which it's an incredible book. It's very eye-opening, very disturbing, very important read. And 17 years of research, interviews, it's very sensitive interviews, interviewing people that either were incarcerated or families that have had to experience and reconcile with the mass incarcerations, and all of the things that and all of the fallout that has happened from that time. You've had to sift through and understand all these very racist policies that were put in place to make those kind of actions happen in the first place. And it's just so much tragedy. It's just so much hardship that you have to kind of sift through and then process and then synthesize and put into a book. And maybe even that book is its own sense of activism, or it's just kind of truth telling, however you want to go about it. um But I'd imagine that, when you look at all the horror that happened and all the disturbing things that have happened, and then here you are showing up and watching history more or less repeat itself in certain reflections, in certain ways, not directly in the sense of it happening to the same communities, but communities nonetheless, and the same kind of similar types of treatment happening and injustices happening. I'd imagine that some hard feelings happening, some anger and resentment and disbelief and various things like that happen while you are sitting there in person and present and dealing with these the people that are continuing the problem, and maybe it's their unresolved karmic connections that are promulgating the very issues that you're witnessing. But I imagine like there being some really hard feelings that are going on with that. How do you just, I mean, I know we talked a little bit about the approach of like channeling overwhelm into something a little bit more compassionate. But I was just to kind of extract a little bit more detail of it, because we do right now, I find, live in such trying times, and a lot of difficulty is has happened and might be imminent. What are some techniques that you like to do to stop the frazzle of the mind that kind of will latch on to things that could feed anger, sustain anger? And how do you find that you can find ways to be productive and channel and maintain a sense of compassion when such disturbing things continue to happen?
You know, as Buddhist people, we have more than one technique. Um, and let me just mention three that, off the top, what you just said, come to mind. One is we do reframing. Some people call it perspectival change, but like you have a difficulty in front of you, and if you frame it out bigger, then that same thing, it's not like it's gone away or anything, but it's not as overwhelming because it's smaller because you made the frame bigger. That's often the purpose of doing certain kinds of meditation practice and other things is reframing and seeing things in a different type of context. And so and we, as Buddhist people, we have a big vision of space and a big vision of time. And so some things that seem so overwhelming in that moment, if you make the time bigger or if you make the space bigger, that can help a lot. It doesn't directly tackle it, it just reframes it. So that's one. And number two is we can sometimes directly tackle it and transform things that are negatively karmically charged things inside of ourselves or inside of other people, and then just do techniques to transform it into something that's different. And then the third one is sometimes that transformation happens when you don't think in singular ways. When you think of like there's one thing and you need to change it, it's too much. And so when you said anger, one of the my Sotoshu colleague, Diane Benage, she used to make a metaphor. She was, one of the first American nuns who trained at Aichisemon Nisodo, the nunnery of Sotoshu in near Aichi, in near Nagoya, in Aichi Prefecture, Japan. And I remember, because Japan is such a volcanic country, and we have so many mountains and hot springs and volcanic explosions and earthquakes and whatnot. We tend to think of volcanic magma as a kind of like almost like it's it can erupt and become dangerous and create havoc when we have these kind of volcanic explosions. But Japan is also the land of hot springs. And so when you combine that same thing, the magma, she would say, when you combine it with water, you can create a hot spring. It becomes this healing place where human beings and even animals can heal themselves from the mixture of this kind of powerful destructive force and water. When you combine it, it can become a third thing. And so I think we Buddhists are have many, many techniques to take something that's a kind of difficult or dangerous or negative or something, and then just put something else together with it to create some third thing. And so for anger, just water, compassion is a great way to create something else. And so uh, I could go on, but there's many of our teachings and practices that allow us to transform things, or if not transform, at least put it in a different frame. And so I don't know. Those are and there's uh, I think your podcast says 84,000 gates. But there's many ways to tackle these things, and so yeah, I think our you know tradition is a tradition of hope and of possibility. When we are faced with a difficult karmic circumstance, it's easy to not be able to see a way out. And our tradition is a tradition that brings different tools to just give people a sense of imagination and then also a sense of possibility.
And I really appreciate that visual of the, adding that water of compassion to something that can be as red hot and as destructive as molten lava, creating a hot spring. It's just such a beautiful image, and yeah, there's that healing quality to it. And then also too, I mean, I've just heard um, from other people on this podcast, but just in general about the legendary wonderfulness of those Japanese hot springs. So, like they really are sought after experiences,
Yeah.
and to be able to turn something so destructive into being a draw into a positive thing and a healing thing nonetheless is such an amazing quality. So thank you for that image, especially. I mean, the other examples that you provided were also wonderful, but just like that, maybe I'm just a visual person, so thank you for offering that. And then too, like with your studies of just American Buddhism, and we mentioned it before with your experience of being in LA and being surrounded by, and I didn't realize this, that LA was such a important city and city that has so many different expressions and manifestations of Buddhism that are happening. And as someone that is a scholar that studies American Buddhism and how it's been manifesting and evolving, I'm just curious what your in very broad, I guess, terms, what your experience has been like engaging with contemporary Buddhism, whether it be in Los Angeles or otherwise, maybe elsewhere in the country, but also too, I mean, and this is very much, I'm not trying to uh, put you on the spot here and make you say something that might not be scholarly or academically responsible, but if you have any kind of thoughts about where you might see American Buddhism going, I'm just curious if you have any projections or if you have any thoughts about where it could go as just a movement in itself.
That's a very good question. I think there are a couple things that one could maybe say. No, number one is that it is, as I mentioned earlier, a very unique moment in Buddhist history where so many lineages are next to each other, living next to each other. And, I happen to be of Japanese and British kind of ethnic background. And these days, in addition to what the U.S. Census says about mixed race people and the kind of changing composition of American life, especially in places like California, where the traditional notions of America as being a kind of or race issues being a black and white thing. Black and white Americans in California are going to be the minority, and Asian Latinx people are going to be the majority of this particular corner of the United States. And so, as that changes and as there's more intermarriage and mixed families, it's not just the racial demographic and composition is shifting and changing, and there's some implications and things about the future related to that one could cite. But religious mixing is also going on. We have somebody working at my university who's half Pakistani and half Japanese, and the father, is Muslim and mother is Buddhist, and they allowed their kids to go both to the mosque and to the Buddhist temple, Japanese American Buddhist temple, until age 16 was kind of required to go to both, and then they could make a choice at 16 which one they wanted to go to. And she happened to choose the Buddhist temple as her particular wish to affiliate, and different kind of combinations, different kind of choices, different. It's I think going to be more and more the case, and we find it at our historic Japanese American temples, whether it's Orange County Buddhist Church, my temple, like where more and more non-Japanese, like I think Orange County is now 1/4, Mexican American, Latin American, like Latinx people membership, where it used to be almost 100% Japanese American. So things are shifting and changing in new combinations and new kind of, things that it's hard to 100% predict what's going to happen to American Buddhism, but the idea that it's going to be a place where there might be mixing of lineages, might be a mixing of family traditions, and might be, et cetera. I think that's more likely than purity of things. I think that's one thing, which is, I think, a very Buddhist approach. Is we are more hybrid, pluralistic, rather than singular and, you know, purist oriented in our general outlook on things. And so it wouldn't surprise me that we find much more uh, complex formations of Buddhist sanghas and families and individual even practice paths in the future. So that's one kind of comment I could make about just what I see, going on and how things have shifted from even 10 years ago or 20 years ago.
Yeah, and even like there's that kind of sense of like maybe even dual practices too, like happening side by side, or however you might internalize it too. I've heard someone say that you're operating almost with like two hearts, having one heart that might be Buddhist, one that might be Episcopalian, or might be something else. And I'd be curious, I mean, just in the sense of that example that you mentioned where a colleague of yours has a 16-year-old child who at some point when they turned 16 made that choice of which one they would affiliate with. But I'm sure Islam maybe still factors into some philosophy of their life, at some point too. And there's a lot of interfaith or exchange happening even just within an individual bodies or experience. So yeah, I certainly appreciate and can see what you're talking about as far as like the nuance and complexity that might emerge uh, in the near future, or if not, just later on. It's it as someone that has spent so much time investigating and studying uh, Buddhist communities, especially the Japanese and Japanese American communities in California and otherwise. Um, it must be fascinating to see how things have been emerging, developing, and how they will continue to grow into this kind of more pluralistic experience for other people and different paths as they emerge. And then, I really have greatly enjoyed our conversation. I just had two more questions that are more or less kind of succinct, and one of which is if there's anything that you have anything coming up that you'd like to promote, or if there's any cause or foundation that you'd like to shed some light on and get some eyes and ears on. I'd be happy to help share that. And then also to, if there's any advice that you'd want to give to somebody who is walking the Buddhist path that you would have wanted to have heard along your way at some point. If there's any advice that you would have want to give to your earlier self along the way. And then while we're excuse me, while we're talking about promotion, especially, I just want to mention that you are the author of books such as The Other Side of Zen, A Social History of Soto Zen Buddhism in Tokugawa, Japan, American Sutra, A Story of Faith and Freedom in the Second World War, which we had talked about earlier. And you're the editor of 7 volumes, including Hapa Japan, Issei Buddhism in the Americas, American Buddhism, and Buddhism and Ecology. But yeah, if there's anything additionally that you'd like to share, that'd be great.
I'm involved with a project called the IREI project, IREI, and it's based on these monuments built during World War II in these uh, camps for Japanese Americans during that time. Um, and again, it's connected to my teacher's father, Reverend Shinjo Nagatomi, who built this kind of like a Gorinto five-tier stupa monument in Manzanar in California called the Ide-to. And to just means tower, and Ide means to console the spirits. And he was trying to do something for all the people who died in camp, that he had to do the funerals and memorial services. So he, it was a kind of memory project for him to make sure people aren't forgotten. And so this project that I'm involved with, one of the first things we're doing a lot of different things. I won't go into all of it, but one of the first things we did was, for the first time, actually have a record of all of the names of people of Japanese ancestry who were in these camps. Nobody even had created a list before or knew how many people. And so now we know that it's the book that we published 2 years ago called the Irecho. 125,284 names are contained therein. And there's a website, www.idezo.com, www.ireizo.com, where all of this is available. But we have a project to honor each name in the book, and anybody can do the honoring, where it's sequenced by date of birth. So the oldest person who went to camp, it's some 90-year-old woman who's the oldest person's the first name. The baby born right before the last of the camps closed is the last name. And we're just going from the beginning of the book all the way to the end, which means we need at least 125,284 people to help participate. And roughly for the last 2 years, we've gotten to about 83 or 4,000 people have come to put stamps in this book. And it's going to be at the Smithsonian on February 19th, 21st of this year, 2025. And then it's going to go on a national tour for about a year and a half. And so it's if it comes to your neighborhood, please feel free to go and put a little. We have these little stamps that we ask people to place a mark into the book, and that's a collective. Uh, Reverend Tokunaga used to call it the karma of America. We're trying to heal and resolve and unravel some of the karmic things of America's racial past, and this project of honoring personhood, dignity of the individual, of every person who had previously just been a part of this mass of people, is our way to kind of tackle that kind of karmic legacy of our nation. And so therefore it's open to everybody. And so if it comes to a town near you, that's the one plug I have. Please feel free to participate in that. As for your question about what advice for somebody starting on the path, I think that's a good question. I guess I haven't given it much of a think generally, but you know, I mentioned earlier, go in, this kind of karmic connection to a person, to a place, a situation, something. That's a really good thing to be cognizant of. It was certainly for me to find my own teacher. It took a certain number of steps to find the right teacher. And whether it's the right teacher or the right teaching or the right sangha to practice with, or whatever it is that in the early phase of exploring Buddhism, that's a kind of a gut level, feeling more than any. It's not so logical. Just a gut level feeling of like, oh, this feels like the right song. This feels like the right teacher. You have to kind of trust your gut on what karmic connection condition is the right context for you to deepen your training and practice as a Buddhist person. And so, yeah, my advice would trust your gut on that, because that often is uh, helpful. You can find teaching everywhere, but sometimes it's important to find the right key, the right connection ones to take that deeper kind of, you know, plunge into the journey, if that makes sense.
It certainly does. And that element of trust and that kind of like that whatever it is that can compel you to plunge deeper. I mean, that it takes some vulnerability, it takes some risk or whatever it is,
Right.
even if it's just kind of a risk of shame or risk of just general vulnerability. But going with it can be extremely rewarding from what you're saying. And so so thank you for that advice. And Dr. Williams, thank you so much for speaking with me today. I really appreciate you taking the time, and I really appreciate you sharing so much. And also too, I mean, I wish you well, much congratulations to you for receiving Dharma transmission, for you to hold a role as temporary abbot at the headquarters of the Soto Zen tradition, and also too, I mean, that this project that you shared, where it's going to be in the Smithsonian, easy enough for me to say, in February of this year, but also traveling around the country. I mean, what a beautiful thing for people to be able to interact with and to share and to memorialize. There's obviously power in a monument, but there's this engagement quality that this allows, and it really allows for an individual to honor an individual and to play a role in that. So thank you for creating, along with your organization, to creating an opportunity for people to really remember and to bring some dignity back to people that had it compromised in such a meaningful way. So thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you very much. Okay, take care.